There's no kind of rhetoric or logic that is going to persuade the Pakistanis that their main enemy isn't India. Of course it is. And so why do they keep feeding the Taliban? Why do they keep making it difficult for the U.S. to end the job there? Because they see an advantage in keeping the pot boiling in Afghanistan. They don't want an Indian-dominated government in Afghanistan. They want to keep the pot boiling. And so all these pronouncements about the U.S., we're going to probably persuade them. Well, we're going to persuade them that their strategic interest is not in India, but in these. Give me a break. We're never going to persuade them of that. And so this thing will just keep going and going. And the worst news, of course, is that our congressional people, even the good ones like Dave Obey, have now caved again. And it looks like there will be an escalation to the tune of $33 billion. And that will buy many more months of killing and war.
And people can go to Common Dreams website and others and read your new article. Give folks that title again one more time, Ray.
Well, it's a letter to David Obey, who's the head of appropriations. It's a memo that says, look, you called Afghanistan a fool's errand. And then you said, yeah, but we have to fund it. That doesn't make any logical sense, Dave. What's really going on here? And what's really going on here is he's out of there in January. He wants to not alienate the affections of the Washington establishment, and he's letting go to the House a bill that will include enough lipstick, namely a $23 billion for teachers, so that the $33 billion for Afghanistan war will go through. That is unconscionable. He knows better than that, and he can call me an idiot liberal, or that's what he calls some of my friends. But what I'm telling him is that he's a terrible disappointment because he should have stood his ground and not confessed to be, quote, bone tired.
And again, Ray, this has nothing to do with liberal conservative. It's right and wrong. Obama is expanding the wars. Bush expanded it. This is the policy of the establishment. But just briefly, because I want to get into Iran and then North Korea in the time we've got left with you, picking your brain, we appreciate the time. And, of course, you just come on out of the goodness of your heart to do it. I wish you had a book or something we could promote for folks to get your word out even more, but hopefully that's coming in the future. But over the years, you've been so gracious, is my point. What is the exit strategy? Is the exit strategy never leave like Germany or Japan or South Korea? I mean, is the exit strategy quagmire?
Well, I asked Khalid Saad, our former ambassador in Afghanistan. He's actually an Afghan. I asked him at a RAND conference 2 months ago. I said, you don't say much about the oil pipeline anymore or the natural gas pipeline to Afghanistan. Where does that stand? You were in on that from the beginning. And he thought for a second, and he said, well, with all the violence and all the fighting there along the pipeline route, we can't possibly build it right now. Now, I wasn't allowed a follow-up, but my follow-up was going to be, so that's why we're there, to put down the violence, to get the Taliban out of there, and then clear a path for the oil and gas pipelines. Is that it, Ambassador Khalid Saad? So, it's a strategic sort of thing where the U.S. will not act in any other way than as an empire. And you need to have a little bit of humility because we're not going to be able to call the shots in that part of the world anymore.
Well, here's my next question. I mean, as you know, you've studied it more than most out there. Nobody's ever been able to successfully continually conquer these people. I mean, can you just briefly sum up in maybe 2 minutes the mindset of these tribal groups, these Pashtuns and others in Afghanistan and in areas of Pakistan? Because from my layman research and what every other analyst going back 400 years, people who fought there have said is the more you kill them, the more they fight. Just like Americans used to be. I mean, what happened with the British here? I mean, that's what any red-blooded group is going to do. They're not going to stop fighting. They're not drinking fluoride and watching I Love Lucy. They're not fat, dumb, happy Americans.
Well, I'd rather be, back in 1776, I sure would rather have been an insurgent rather than a, cooperator with the Tories. In a word, there are these strange people in Afghanistan. They're in tribes mostly, and they have this strange resistance to invaders coming into their country. And they have the benefit of these huge mountains and very vulnerable valleys. rallies. And so going back 2,500 years, Alex, to Alexander the Great, who was the first of about 7 big countries trying to conquer Afghanistan, they've been able to, the tribal leaders have been able to block that. And you know, what I tell people is, you know why they call Alexander the Great? Well, they call him the Great because he was sensible enough to look at the height of those mountains, to look at the casualties he was already taking on his flanks from these, quote, militants, and turn around and say, this wasn't a good idea. I'm going back to Asia Minor where I can outlast all this. That's what made him great. From him, since him, you have the Indians, you have the Persians, you have the Mongolians under Genghis Khan, you have the British, you have the Russians, and now the Americans are going to succeed where all those didn't. Give me a break.
Oh, boy. So what, we're going to be there in 5 years still. It's just never going to end, a meat grinder they feed troops into, and out of it comes oil pipelines and opium.
Well, I'm hopeful that the American people, you know, if they listen to people like us, finally, I think I have a basic faith in the American people. They're good sense, and I think there's a limit to what they will tolerate. The big challenge, of course, Alex, and the reason I come on your show and applaud what you're doing is that you're one of the few people that tell it like it is. You're not under the fawning corporate media, and that's what we need. We need people to listen and then act, and I think action is necessary right now.
Well, again, for those that just joined us, I'm not heaping laurels on you, sir, but people need to know you've been right. A full year and a half before it came out with Cy Hirsch and New Yorker magazine, and was confirmed that Cheney wanted to paint up patrol boats blue and have Navy SEALs attack our own ships, and that was confirmed. Bush, of all people, said, no, we're not doing that. But it just shows the mental level. You came on air and said, well, if I was Cheney and Bush, they'll probably paint up some ships like Iranians. This is on record on this show, and attack our ships. And later I said, did you have inside intel? You just said, no, that's how these people work. And now I want to shift gears and ask the difference between Cheney and Bush and Obama. It's now come out, and I have it here in my stack, Washington Post, CNN, Business Insider. Cheney had gotten his way, we would have gone to war with Russia, and it's basically admitted in Ron Asmus's new book, who was inside these meetings, that NATO was part of it. They launched the attack, back through Georgia against South Ossetia on 888, and that Cheney wanted to go ahead and have nuclear war. I mean, that really shows these are completely unstable people, like Curtis LeMay or somebody. And so that mindset, has that carried over into Obama? Because when I see him out there, at least at some levels, supporting Israel and Netanyahu, saying they may hit Iran, can you speak to the mindset in the Pentagon? Is any of this Cheney stuff left there versus what's going on in the White House now? And then how that posture, the posture you believe from your research is there, how that's going to affect what goes on in Iran and now North Korea?
Well, Iran, I think, is the most pressing issue. It's the one that the president has most difficulty with because the pressure from what is called the Likud lobby, other people call it the Israel lobby, is immense. And that's been demonstrated recently by a whole string of events. Dennis Blair, a former four-star admiral who headed up the national intelligence setup in our country, was canned last week. Why? Well, there were a bunch of misadventures with not catching potential terrorists, but the basic reason, in my view, that he was canned was that he had the temerity 15 months ago to appoint a person to be the chief analyst in our government, the chief intelligence analyst, a person named Chaz Freeman, who made the very bad mistake of saying publicly that he thought Palestinians also had rights as human beings in addition to Israelis. Now, what happened was he was appointed by Dennis Blair. This is not a cabinet appointment. This is within his own little purview, head of the National Intelligence Council, Chaz Freeman. He was appointed in the morning, and he had lunch with David Broder of the Post, and it was, David said, aren't you expecting a lot of opposition? And Freeman said, no, it's going to sail through. Then Blair got up saying about the appointment and saying he was a terrific person. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Lieberman from Connecticut, had gotten to Rahm Emanuel in the White House and said, we can't have this guy. He's too unbiased. He doesn't react with knee-jerk solidity to the interests of Israel. And so Blair had to go back to Freeman and say, I'm going to have to ask you to ask me to withhold your nomination, to reverse your appointment. It wasn't like a nomination. He had been appointed. So he served as National Intelligence Director for 8 hours, okay? Now, that is unprecedented. I've seen a lot of stuff in my 50 years in Washington, but never before have I seen the Israel lobby or any other lobby derail an appointment that had already been made in the bowels of the intelligence community. Now, to the extent that...
So you're saying Israel's got pull that our government doesn't even have?
Well, that seems to be the case. I had hoped it would be different with Obama, but it's not.